Thank you very much for that. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Emergencies Board this afternoon. I see all the members are present. Councillor Alistair Mackay, Devine, Councillor Ian Nicholson, Councillor Michelle Campbell and myself, Marie McGurk. Today we're having the meeting recorded and the recording's already set. We have no apologies. The declaration stands as it has for the last couple of weeks. Councillor Michelle Campbell has a declaration of interest. Can we go to item 1, the minutes previous meeting? Can we agree the previous minutes? Councillor Mackay?
Yes, they're fine, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Devine?
If you don't mind, can I just say something on that? I'll be asking for hopefully for later on for Gordon to give us a report on the amenity sites, but for the avoidance of doubt for anybody who's watching this, nobody wants the amenity sites open more than the 5 councillors who are sitting in this board. So I just want to make that quite clear to everybody who watches it, that we are anxious to get it, but we won't be opening them, I presume, Councillor Nicholson, until everything is safe and we're advised that we can go ahead and open them. It's just that some people don't seem to realise that these things have to be done properly.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Councillor Devine. Councillor Nicholson, you want to come in?
Yeah, no, I think I had a chat with Eddie at the start of the week. I think it's been made clear that the officers are working at a national level on this as well, and through negotiations with the Scottish Government. And when they are safe to open, and we're given that sort of assurances that we can, then they will be open, but they will obviously be opened in a phased manner, I suspect, given the pent-up demand that appears to be out there for them. So I think that's a sensible thing to do. It's just to ensure that we follow the national guidance and to make sure that when the sites do eventually open, they'll be opened safely. So I agree with Councillor Devine's view on that as well. Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Nicholson, you've noted you agree to the minutes of the previous meeting.
Yes.
Thank you for that. Councillor Campbell, do you agree to the minutes of the previous meeting?
I do agree, Convener, thank you.
Councillor Mackay, you asked to come back in. Please come in.
Just seeing as you were talking about the amenity sites there, I should maybe point out that somebody asked Eddie and ourselves to raise a motion about opening the amenity sites, and we decided that it was an inappropriate action at this stage.
Yeah.
However, I see that the UK government has published guidance on May the 5th on how to open recycling centres, albeit progressively. So we'll be looking for a report on that.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll do that. Thank you. Can we go to item 2 now, update on COVID-19? Can I hand over to you, Sandra?
Thank you, Councillor McGurk, and good afternoon, councillors. I hope you're all well, and I hope you found this week's update report helpful. We're joined this week by Martin Hill, the Group Commander for Scottish Fire and Rescue, and I understand we are going to be joined by Alan Murray, the Divisional Commander for Police Scotland, but unfortunately he's not joined the call yet. Hopefully by the time we get to that item he'll be on the call. Both Martin and Alan attend our emergency management team on a weekly basis on a Monday of each week to participate in the discussion at a senior management level on the Council's response to the pandemic, and we thought it would be useful for them to attend this week's meeting of the Emergencies Board to brief members on the response from their respective organisations and answer any questions or concerns that you may have. So if I may, Chair, I'd like to suggest that we allow Martin and then hopefully Alan come in to take you through their service updates first, which are provided at paragraphs 4.3 to 4.10 of the report before we go through the rest of the report. So I'll bring in Martin Hill first, if that's okay.
That would be fine. Martin, would you like to come in, please?
Yes, that's totally fine. So if I can just provide a brief update in addition to the response that's in front of everybody, hopefully there. So if I break it down quickly into 3 elements in terms of our staffing, as I have updated every Monday morning, At the outset of the outbreak, we experienced staff having to self-isolate in increasing numbers. I'm pleased to say that not only has that plateaued, but we have actually seen a vastly improving picture in terms of the number of our staff who have returned to work. There was and still is, a extensive contingency planning piece in place that would determine where we best place our assets and resources should we require to move them around in order to have optimum coverage throughout Renfrewshire. But I'm pleased to say that certainly thus far that has not been required. We have continued to operate well within our confidence levels, and through the mechanism of our daily tasking meetings and our common recognised information picture, we keep those contingency arrangements on the table and under review. In terms of our prevention and protection and our fire safety enforcement teams, clearly we've had to shape up slightly differently there in terms of how we engage and provide those services, but nonetheless, I can confirm that the Fire Safety Enforcement team have continued to consult, they've continued to respond to requests for advice and guidance, and they've been very, very active throughout. Just in terms of the activity levels, and again I had provided a brief synopsis on that, we have noted a small increase in terms of the number of primary and also secondary fires within Renfrewshire. If I can turn to the secondary fires first, so typically fires in open areas, grass fires, heathland fires and rubbish, etc. We have seen a small increase in that area. I would say that that is not uncommon for this time of year, and certainly not where we have experienced a prolonged period of dry weather, such as what we are experiencing at present. It is somewhat difficult to identify where it has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic and the situation in which we find ourselves, but what I can say is that again we have, through the outbreak, we've continued to engage through the mechanism of the daily tasking meetings in order to provide targeted interventions and multi-agency response where we've been able to do that. In terms of the primary fires, nationally there has been a rise noted in primary fires, those occurring at a specified location, and particularly house fires. And again, we have within the Renfrewshire area tried to be on the front foot with issuing some advice and guidance around fire safety in the home. And again, that has been recognised at a national level, just given the fact that people are self-isolating at home in increasing numbers. And if you add in some additional factors, for example, at least the potential for increasing amounts of alcohol, etc., then in some cases people perhaps have the potential to become slightly more vulnerable. And that is the background and the motivation for putting out those messages. But that hopefully is a brief synopsis, Councillor McGurk, and I'm happy to take any questions or queries that anyone may have.
Thank you for that, and I appreciate it. Members, do any members have a question for Martin? Alistair, do you want to come in?
Hello. Yes, you say there's been an increase in house fires and the like specific locations. Is there any evidence to suggest that maybe the build-up of rubbish is maybe causing a factor in this?
Martin?
Yeah, sorry, thanks for that, Councillor. What I can say is, Councillor Mackay, there was a link that was made at national level between an increase in secondary fires, and particularly those that were occurring due to rubbish, fly tipping being set on fire, and a potential link between that and the COVID outbreak, clearly. What I can say, and I have consulted regularly with Chris and others within the council, whilst we have seen a small increase in terms of the number of secondary fires across the board, we haven't seen a notable increase in terms of fires occurring as a result of fly tipping being set on fire, if that's helpful at all. But we've continued to keep it under discussion. and again through the mechanism of the daily tasking group, we've tried to provide those targeted interventions just as early as we can, Councillor.
Councillor Mackay?
Thanks for that. I think I was trying to sort of ascertain really if fires within properties, whether there was any contributory factor from rubbish accumulating, because I'm mindful of the fact that people who live in flats don't enjoy the luxury of having space in the garden or the garage to store things, and I'm just keen to ascertain whether that has any detrimental effect.
Martin, do you want to come back into that, please?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Convener. Apologies, I misunderstood the first time. We have not seen as a contributory factor specifically people hoarding rubbish or that they would otherwise be able to dispose of in their home. I guess that's as succinct an answer as I can provide on that, Councillor.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you. Michelle, would you like to come in, please?
Yes, thank you, Convener. Can I first of all say thank you, Martin, for the report and for the work that you are all doing in particular over this period of time. I just have a question about antisocial behaviour and fire raising. Just obviously you've mentioned about open area fires and just generally statistics. Do we have any breakdown of if there's been an increase in antisocial behaviour and fire raising at all?
Sorry,
yeah,
Martin.
sorry, I'm having a slight issue with connectivity coming back in there. In terms of the antisocial behaviour element, I would probably hand that over to the Chief Superintendent in order to pick up on the criminality aspect of that. What I can do is I can consult figures, but certainly from what I have seen, I haven't seen any particular spike that combines the secondary fires element with an increase in antisocial behaviour. That's not what our crews are reporting back from the instance that they are attending.
Okay. Councillor Campbell?
Yeah, no, I'm fine for that to go to whoever's most appropriate to answer, and thank you very much for the response.
Very welcome. Thanks very much for your time, Martin. Alan Murray's now in the room. Sandra, do you wish to invite Alan Murray?
Yes, I believe he's on the call now, so Alan will come in and give his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Alan, please come in.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Just an update from ourselves. You all obviously have seen the report, but it's the good news is that the compliance with the social distancing and the associated regulations across Renfrewshire has generally been exceptionally good, and there's no doubt that the vast majority of individuals are complying and are cooperating with our officers when we're out there giving advice and assistance. There is a small minority of our local community clearly haven't recognised the importance of social distancing, and the requests to comply with lockdown regulations. So we have had to give out 300 warnings and 100 fixed penalty tickets for non-compliance, and I would say that the tickets for non-compliance we always explain first, and it's only when people show no signs of complying that we resort to giving out a ticket. And I think you'll agree that 100 tickets over the period of the lockdown is a very small number and does show that the level of cooperation that we're getting. We do have proactive patrols and a properly informed operational response, and that's guided by complaints from the elected members and what we're hearing from members of the public and of course our own officers. There are hotspots being identified in Renfrewshire, particularly Barshaw Park and Clyde View. We are proactively patrolling these areas and again trying to explain to people what the regulations are. And clearly there are a minority of people who are flouting the regulations, but there is no question that there is a lack of clarity, in particular between what's been said south of the border and in Scotland. So we'll be continuing to patrol these areas. Again, I would say that we will be focusing on engaging with people, explaining and encouraging people and enforcement by means of a fixed penalty ticket or as a last resort arrest will only come after that engagement, explanation, encouragement has not worked. And I have to say I'm delighted with the reactions of members of the public, but also I have to commend the patience and professionalism of my officers. We still have regular business and crime, so the enforcement of the COVID-19 legislation has come on top of all that. So I'm really delighted with the professionalism that they've shown. We have had support really good support from national resources. We've had the Mounted Branch and the Force Reserve have been down helping us, and there's also been officers redeployed from central and back office functions to frontline roles. These are from our own division and from headquarters, so there has been a focus on providing that high profile, high visibility response. With regard to safety, we do have a number of processes in place just to make sure that our officers are safe, and unfortunately our officers can't avoid some contact with people who may be displaying symptoms. Also to make sure that we don't unnecessarily put other people at risk. So we've now got good availability of PPE and good decontamination cleaning procedures in place, so that officers can keep themselves safe and in a position that they won't put other people at risk. Regard to sickness, we're currently reasonably healthy. Our sickness at one time it was up to nearly 17%. It's now, I think, this morning it was down to about 6.5%. Police officer absence, and we usually run at about 4 or 5%. So we're actually getting quite healthy resource levels, and sickness has never got to a stage where it's been a critical issue for us, thankfully, and hopefully that will continue. There's a national command structure has been set up to progress the recovery phase, as the report says, and basically that's continuing to look at what we're doing now and the best way to ease ourselves either out of lockdown or to adjust quickly to any changes in the restrictions, which is probably the more likely scenario in the immediate future. With regard to serious crime, it is generally down, but there are elements of that that have stayed persistently high, and now we are seeing, unfortunately, that criminals are returning to normal business as well. So I think we will. But overall, it's a very positive picture from us. As I said, we are delighted with the vast majority of local people have tried to assist us and have complied. That's the report. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Yes, thanks very much for that, Alan. Appreciate it. Councillor Devine, you want to ask a question, and then Councillor Mackay. Councillor Devine, you want to come in, please?
Yeah, that's great. Alan, I don't mean this isn't a political question, but I see the Prime Minister is coming out on Sunday with to ease the lockdown rules. I am not in favour of that, at least for another week or so. I think people, if it happens in England, will stretch the boundaries in Scotland and try to do the same thing. Do you think the police will be able to take care of that when people will start arguing about but? It just seems...
Sorry, Councillor, I think the answer to that, yes, we will be able to react to it. We did have some issues that we had to do a bit of extra explaining to people when the National Police Chiefs Council England and Wales issued some guidelines that were not pertinent to Scotland, and some people had read them and thought that they could maybe do some things that they couldn't according to local guidelines. So if the two governments diverge, we will closely examine what our communications are, and we'll make sure our cops are armed with the knowledge that they need to keep out and explaining and encouraging. And clearly, I said issuing a fixed penalty ticket is a last resort. So if someone has just genuinely picked up the wrong end of the stick because of something that they've heard that applies down south this year, we will take the trouble to explain that. But in the very, very short term. But I'm happy that we can get our communications out, and with the help of the council, that will mitigate against that. So we're aware it could be an issue. I'm not overly concerned about it. I hope that answers your question, Councillor.
I just don't envy the police's job in trying to differentiate between a message from some, two different areas. I personally think we should maintain the lockdown for at least another week or so. But anyway, thanks very much, Alan.
Thanks for that, Councillor Devine. Councillor Mackay, you want to come in and ask Alan a question, please?
Yes, good afternoon. It's more of a question regarding contacting local police forces, and I know dialing 101 at the moment it can take, you could be in a queue for 20 odd minutes, and I'm wondering whether you could furnish a list of local police officers, police offices or stations, whatever you like to call them, so that they could be contacted directly with specific local matters rather than going through the National Call Centre of 101.
Okay, thanks for that, Alan.
I think there's two elements to that. First of all, our official figures, and I'm not sure exactly what they are, but I can check up and get back to you, are not showing a 20-minute wait 101. It's quite considerably less than that. The problem is about phoning local police offices, which was the system, of course, before the central call centres. That was a really inconsistent response, and it's also depending who picks up the phone. They have to have contact with the officers that they're going to send. So probably what I'd say is that if something's urgent and our front counters are still open, people can still come into offices and they can still phone into front bars of offices. But I would say by far the quickest way of contacting us and importantly getting the response is still to go through the 101 system, or if it's urgent, the 999 system. What I would say to people that we've experienced a bit of what the National Health Service are, that people maybe don't want to contact the police, so we're not really experiencing a surge in demand. And I think it's just us to say we're open for business, so it's the same guidance as before. If you think you need the police, do phone. But I can check up on what the response times are for 101 and get back to you if that makes some help.
Alistair?
Well, I guess that'd be handy. It's just that I was thinking that maybe if there's some local issue, a local matter that's not too urgent but really needs discussing with local police, whether a local contact number might be more appropriate. But if you prefer using the 101 system, that's fine.
Okay.
I think probably to get the right local officer, going through the 101 system, the first instance is probably still the best way. As I said, our front counters at Renfrewshire and Paisley are still open the vast majority of the time, so we'd be still happy if people do want to phone the local number or present themselves in person, then we're happy to take the reports and things, whatever way is most suitable for the public.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Very welcome. Thank you very much. Any other questions for Alan, members? No. Thank you very much, Alan, for your attendance today. Take care. Stay safe. Over to you, Sandra.
Thank you, Councillor McGurk. And with your permission, it'd probably be helpful if we could allow both Alan and Martin to leave the call
Yes, that'd be fine.
just now, if that's okay. No
Yes,
further questions for them.
Of course, thank you. Yes, please do.
Thank you.
Thanks very much then. So if we can go back then in the report to section 3 and the updated national position on the number of hospital cases and the number of deaths, and the very difficult news this week that the UK has now suffered the greatest number of deaths of any country in Europe, with those figures now exceeding 30,000. However, you will also see at paragraph 3.6 in the weekly figures released yesterday by the National Records of Scotland that last week, for the first time, there was a reduction in the number of COVID-related deaths registered in Scotland since March, and I know that's something that we all hope can be sustained in next week's figures. Paragraph 3.7 provides a summary of main policy changes announced this week, and paragraph 3.8 a summary of the main funding announcements. The key ones I draw your attention to are those on contact tracing, which is set out in more detail at paragraphs 3.10 to 3.15, and the publication last week of the Framework for Decision Making in Scotland, which sets out some of the potential initial changes to the current lockdown when it is safe to do so, and these are set out at paragraph 3.16 in more detail. The members will be aware that both the UK and the Scottish Governments are due to review lockdown restrictions today. By law, the Prime Minister is expected to make a statement on Sunday, as we've already discussed, to outline any plans for the next stage of the lockdown at a UK level, and the First Minister has already announced today at 12:30 that there will not be any changes to the lockdown in Scotland. At paragraph 3.8, members will also note that the Cabinet Secretary for Finance has now confirmed in Parliament that the Scottish Government will pass on the full £155 million of ban consequentials to local government, and whilst the distribution of this has still to be clarified, it's expected that this council would receive around £4.5 to £5 million, which will be a welcome contribution to the costs that we are incurring. As indicated last week at the board, a further report on the current financial position of the council will be on next week's agenda. And share with your agreement, I'd like to bring in Chris Dalrymple to say a bit more about the test, trace, isolate and support strategy under development, as it's going to be quite a major change for us all that's likely to be with us for a considerable period of time. So I'd like to bring in Chris, if that's okay now.
Yes, that's fine, Chris. We'll do questions once the section's been finished. Thank you. Chris, would you like to come in?
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Sandra, and good afternoon, Board. As detailed by the First Minister earlier this week, the contact tracing model, or test, trace, isolate and support as it's known, will be a key tool to reduce the transmission of COVID-19 over the coming weeks and months. This will be led nationally for consistency reasons, for example training and guidance. However, it will be led locally by Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board, and in particular the Greater Glasgow and Clyde Resilience Partnership that Renfrewshire sits under. Whilst we don't have the full details at the moment, discussions have taken place regarding multi-agency teams working in localities across the wider Glasgow area. This will be a tiered approach, so what this means is there will be a consultant in public health medicine at the top. There will be a couple of experienced contact tracers below them, for example environmental health officers or sexual health officers, and then a team of call handlers and tracers below them that will feed into it. As I alluded to previously, the contact tracing would involve interviewing the confirmed case to collect and contact them, collate all information from a 48-hour period before symptom onset until the case was then isolated. The challenges come if someone has been in close contact with a confirmed case, they will be deemed as high risk. Therefore, we will need to undertake daily checks with them to see how they are, and they will be required to self-isolate for 14 days. If a person has been in contact but is classed as low risk, they will just simply be asked to monitor their symptoms but go about their daily routine. As Sandra alluded to, the project will be resource intensive, and the implementation is definitely time critical, because this has to be in place really when any restrictions are lifted to allow us to stop the transmission of any COVID-19 further within the community. Therefore, meetings will continue early into next week, and we are currently preparing a paper with NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde to go to the Resilience Partnership next Friday which will detail proposals and potential next steps. As always, I will keep the Chief Executive updated on everything that's going on, who in turn will pass the details on to this Emergencies Board. I am more than happy to take any questions, Convener.
Okay, thanks for that. Sandra?
Yes, I guess if there are any questions for Chris or any questions on the rest of section 3 in the report, Councillor McGurk.
That'll be fine. Councillor Devine, you wanted to ask a question, then Councillor Nicholson. Councillor Devine, do you want to come in first, please?
Yeah, one is a statement which is again for people who are unfortunately not on this board. It's just to say that this board has been consistent right from the start, that the money that we're now going to get from the Scottish Government, every single person on this, every single councillor on this board has been behind every council getting their money in, and it's good to see that we could get as much as £5 million. My question is to John Traynor, and it's the one I ask every week, is there any spike in the domestic abuse in Renfrewshire?
Right, would you like him to answer that just now? Councillor John, could you come in and answer that specific question for Councillor Devine?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Councillor Devine, the rate of referrals this week has remained fairly steady with the last couple of weeks. So whilst we're still seeing a slight reduction on the same period last year, we have had over the period of lockdown a small increase. We are looking at ways of promoting how people who are experiencing gender-based violence or other protection issues are able to ensure they pass those concerns on to the council so that we are able to offer the appropriate support.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nicholson, you want to come in, please?
Yeah, it's a question, two questions actually. The first one is with regards to the 155 million. That was the COSLA meeting on Friday there. Eventually, we got to a point where the view of COSLA was to have that 155 million transferred straight through, and I'm quite pleased that Kate Forbes agreed with that and announced it, I think, on Tuesday afternoon. The question for Alan really is, I know there's still a bit of negotiations going on with regards to the distribution of it. Has there been any talk about how that money will factor in to the costing exercise that we're doing just now with COSLA and the Scottish Government? I've not heard any indication that 155 million will sit alongside, or will it be incorporated in to the calculations by the Scottish Government, or factored in as part of the net cost, in a sense, of COVID to councils? In other words, is it an extra additional 155 million as opposed to being taken into the calculation frame? And the other one I'm really quite interested in seeing is the £5 million fund for landlords.
Yeah.
Announced on May the 5th, also just a couple of days ago. I'm interested in knowing how that actually works. The way it's written, it reads to me like a fund for landlords, when in reality I would suspect it should be a fund for tenants of landlords. And I'm not sure how that process works if tenants find themselves in difficulty with paying their rent. I'm not quite sure how the burden of that shifts, in a sense, to the tenant to pay this back as accumulated debt, or the landlord just gets their money. So I'm not quite sure, but I think it'd be worthwhile for us to know exactly how that process works, or is intended to work, and who will do the distribution of this money, and if its intent, as I said, is to support tenants as opposed to keeping landlords who necessarily may not be suffering financially as much as their tenants may be. So that is a question around that I think we need a wee bit more wraparound information about. Thanks.
Okay. Alan Russell, do you want to come in and answer the first part of that question, please?
Yeah, sure, Councillor McGurk. Yeah, the £155 million, Councillor Nicholson, as detailed in the report, the discussions are ongoing between COSLA and the Scottish Government in relation to the proposed distribution of those resources. And as touched on in the report, those are in addition to the earlier announcements that have been covered in the earlier reports to the board. So my understanding is that this funding will be to assist in meeting all of the costs that the councils are experiencing. The cost collection exercise that I referred to last week, over the course of this week and going into next week, that is currently being progressed in terms of the moderation exercise to ensure that there is a degree of consistency operating across all councils in terms of capturing that, so that it's as accurate as possible and looks as consistent as possible, albeit that some councils will have specific matters that maybe don't impact on other councils as much. But so I'm expecting that the next week that exercise in terms of the first cut of the cost estimates will be completed, and the government are certainly referring to that in the letter that was issued by the Cabinet Secretary, of wanting to obviously see the detail behind that first cut of that exercise, that I'm sure will get taken into account in consideration of the distribution of the 155. The clear preference from local government was for the 155 to be distributed broadly on the normal distribution basis, and I think, as I've touched on, I would expect that the certainly from renters, and I'd suspect it'll be broadly similar across the country, that the cost estimate of the immediate emergency response, so the first 3 months or so of this up to the end of June, which is what the exercise is focused on, I would expect that this funding and the earlier funding announcements will be broadly consumed by that initial estimate. And of course, as I've touched on, the expectation is that the costs that the council and indeed other councils will bear will continue to extend beyond this immediate emergency period and extend right into the recovery period and beyond. And that's the sort of discussions and negotiations I expect COSLA will continue to have with the Scottish Government. So it's absolutely welcome that it's been confirmed that will be passed on, and that will form part of the overall funding envelope that will help support. But my expectation is that that will be broadly consumed, I think, by the many of the immediate responses that have been put in place by councils across the country.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much for that, Alan. Sandra, who would you like to answer the second part, the second question from Councillor Nicholson?
Probably Mary would
yes.
be the best person to ask. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Mary, could you answer that, please? Thank you.
Yes, Councillor McGurk. My understanding is that the intent of the money is to protect tenants, as Councillor Nicholson says. However, the fund is available to landlords and covers up to 100% of lost rental income for a single property. It's for small landlords with up to 5 or less properties who have lost rental income due to tenants being unable to pay their rent. And the rationale behind it is to, I suppose, support no action being taken to evict tenants for a 6-month period. So it builds on that legislation that came in to protect tenants against eviction, and it's offering support to the landlords to ensure that they do have financial support if their tenants are unable to pay the rent. But I think it's very much available for the landlord, but the intent is to support the tenants. And the guidance says that they expect landlords to be as flexible as possible with their tenants to discuss managing rental payments and to help them find sources of financial support and advice, and that the private rented landlords will need to be able to demonstrate that they have discussed the rent payments with their tenant and reached an agreement on managing their arrears. But I'm happy to send the guidance note over if that's helpful.
Okay, Councillor Nicholson.
Yeah, just I wanted a wee bit of clarity if the council will be administrating this loan, or some organisation that will have some oversight over it all.
Okay, Mary.
I'm not clear at present what the arrangements will be regarding that, but again we can find out more about that and report back.
That'd be great. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Mary. Councillor Michelle Campbell, you want to ask a question now, please?
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, it's to do with the TTIP. It's just a question regarding, and I do appreciate that it's still and the processes have been set up, so there may not be a clear answer, but it's just in terms of the impact and the resourcing that will be required from the council on this. I do appreciate it's multi-agency, but it's just to see what the initial sort of feeling is on that, and has there been any indication from the Scottish Government as to the support that will be made to local authorities in order to ensure that we can deliver appropriately with this, given the importance of it to the national picture? Thank you.
Okay, Sandra, how would you like that answered?
Yes, Chris might have more information on the expectation around the test and trace resourcing, but Councillor Campbell is right. This is going to be a very extensive exercise. It's going to be with us until such time as a vaccine is identified and made available to the wider population. So it could be with us for months, if not years ahead. And so it will become almost a permanent feature of the NHS and the local authority service moving forward. I have had some information today to suggest that there are targets that there will be around 15,500 tests carried out per day once this is fully operational, and obviously depending on the number of positive tests that come out of that, and then the number of close contacts that are generated from those positive tests, there could be relatively substantial numbers of people for the local authority requiring support in the way that we are currently providing support to the shielded group. I'm just off a call with colleague chief executives where this very subject was being discussed, and we are making representations to Scottish Government that this will require funding and support from the Scottish Government if there's an expectation that local authorities will be able to deliver this kind of support over the long term. So your point is well made, but I'll bring in Chris in case he can add anything to that. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Chris.
Thank you, Convener. Councillor Campbell, I think Nicola Sturgeon, when the First Minister, when she spoke the other day, talked about potentially 2,000 contact tracers across Scotland. Going on a simple pro-rata basis, we've been working on approximately 400 to 450 for Greater Glasgow and Clyde area. Your question is the one that we have been asking as part of our discussions, is how many people are NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde going to provide, which will in turn then lead to the decision of Sandra as the Chief Executive, how many will come from local authority, and then the police, fire, SEPA, and potentially the military as well. So your question is the key one, and one that we don't have a definitive answer for, and is one that we're trying to bottom out as quickly as we possibly can.
Okay.
As Sandra was saying as well, as part of the contact tracing, because it's going to be here for such a long time, I know they're looking on a national basis to create potentially a national organisation that will eventually run this whole thing. Therefore, it would release after 3-4 months where local authorities can start to step back a bit from our input into it. It would be a national agency that would take on the TTIS model per se. But as I say, your question is the key one, Councillor Campbell. Trying to identify exactly what the resource is what we're looking to do over the next week or so.
Okay. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Convener. I think that is obviously, like I said, I do appreciate the answer that I've received, that it is a progressive question, but I think it's important that it remains a top priority for this board to consider. So I'd ask that if once officers do have further information, that is brought back to the board so that we can see those stats, please, Convener. Thank you.
Okay, I can give you assurances that will certainly happen, Councillor Campbell. Councillor Devine, you wanted to come in and ask a question?
I just to support Councillor Campbell as well, and I think Councillor Nicholson said the same thing. It's who's going to pay for this. Everything that comes out of governments, it always seems to come down to the councils. But when councils ask for more money, obviously, to do this, because we have to supply the personnel, nobody seems to know the answer, up front about who's going to pay for it. Councils, and again, particularly our council, we cannot be left again to pick up this cost. It's just not reasonable. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Sandra?
Thanks, Councillor McGurk. Unless there's any questions, I'd propose to move on to section 5 now of the report, which is support for communities, and I'd like to bring in Siona Strachan to update you on the position in Renfrewshire's care homes and the care at home service, which you requested more information on at the board last week. There's also been changes in the testing procedures in care homes, which Siona and David can take you through. So if Siona could come in, please.
Thank you very much. Fiona, can you come in, please?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Board. As noted at 3.6 in the report, care homes across Scotland now account for 59% of COVID-related deaths, with the majority of people affected over 75 years. The data is subject to frequent change at this point in time. At today's position, based on the self-reported data from care homes for older people and verified with the Care Inspectorate this afternoon, we have 13 of the 22 care homes which are now affected by COVID-19, with 93 people reporting as having now sadly died since starting data collection. A further 51 people are reported as having COVID-19 symptoms. This is an increase on the figures contained in 5.3 of the board report. This smaller symptomatic group of 51 people will now all be tested, and tests are currently sitting in most of the labs. The reason for the data variation between the national and local information is outlined at 5.4. Care at home services are reported at 5.12, and I know I'm jumping around, but it makes more sense to do them together. And it does show less movement on a daily basis. It has shown a repeated increase, but at a much slower pace, and it has been manageable within services. Again, we have a number of people there who've sadly lost their lives. The support to care homes outlined in this and previous reports has continued, including now joint review with Public Health and the Care Inspectorate of the position for each care home and each registered services, so not just care homes, care at home and other service areas, and issues for each service, and joint action agreed. If I turn to the testing, because there's been quite considerable change over the last couple of days, and even since the board paper was released, understanding has improved of what's happening there. Care home testing for both staff and residents is now being extended, as it says in the report. The testing is led by Public Health and is grouped in the following way. Individual testing, where somebody is symptomatic or unwell, and that's been running for a little while and has been running pretty well, and that again is through GPs with feedback from GPs. The new testing, which is enhanced outbreak investigation, that's for all care homes where a staff member or resident has tested positive. From the 79 individual tests that have recently, over the last 14 days, been completed, there are 6 care homes who will have all staff and residents and any workers within them, irrespective of where they come from, tested. This has significant potential to reduce staffing numbers in any care home, either in our own or in any external care home. If asymptomatic people test positive, because staff will require to be stepped back. So again, it's quite a complicated exercise and very difficult. Comprehensive surveillance, that testing, that's where sample testing in homes is carried out where there's no COVID-related issues. And again, that's an acknowledgement that some people are showing very, very different symptoms. And I think I've spoken about it before. In the older age group, COVID is quite often masked by other conditions and vice versa. It can be very, very difficult to see who has COVID. And there are a number of people we know in the general population who show no symptoms at all in relation to COVID. And the last area is testing across care home groups where care homes are linked. And we do have 2 care homes that have linked care homes locally, i.e. operating on the same site, not with the same staff group, but there is greater potential there for cross-contamination. Within the 3 care homes operated by the HSCP, 6 tests have been carried out in the last few days on residents. 3 are negative and 3 results are awaited. The 3 awaited results are included in the information of the number of people reported as being COVID symptomatic. Additionally, 7 staff in the care homes being tested over the same period all have negative results. I'm very happy to answer any additional questions.
Thanks very much for that. Councillor Devine, you want a question first, and then you, Councillor Mackay. Councillor Devine?
Yeah, this is named at Shona. It's just how the situation is. The amount of deaths in care homes nationally is appalling, and questions need to be asked how this has happened. Just because people are in care homes doesn't mean to say they don't matter. They do, and it's taken a long time for care homes to come to the fore. But there seems to be something in care homes that is unhealthy, and I mean that not in a health way, but 59% of residents of care homes is completely unacceptable. They've died.
Thank you, Councillor Devine. Have you got a question for Shiona, or you just want to make a statement?
No, the statement, but could Shiona, it's under 5.4, Shiona.
Yeah.
Could you explain to me bullet point 4, how that works? You want me to read it out? Can you see it?
No, I'm glaring at it now. I'm just kind of not wearing my glasses.
Well, I'll read it.
No, it's okay. This is the National Records for Scotland information.
It's the one that says not all deaths in Renfrewshire care homes will be registered within Renfrewshire.
Right, okay, right, okay.
How that would work and how. Go on.
So we have a national resource locally that has over 200 beds in it. We buy 47 beds within that care home. So I have direct responsibility for 47 of those residents. So if you are from another area and you're placed, and it happens in all of the care homes, families will tend to place relatives very close to them. Sometimes people who are seeking a care home placement will choose to come back to their place of birth. So not all of the care home residents in Renfrewshire originate from Renfrewshire. And that means that some of the deaths are recorded elsewhere.
That's great, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Mackay, do you want to ask your question, please?
Yes, I'm not quite sure how logistically possible this is, because I'm not familiar with how many care homes fall within Renfrewshire. But what I'd like to know is, would mobile testing units visiting each care home on a regular basis and doing routine testing be a useful tool?
Okay, sure.
I'm quite happy to answer that. I think the approach that we are using is supported testing for the care homes rather than a mobile testing unit. So we do have a testing hub within Renfrewshire. The test kits are issued from there. Following the referral routes that we have. And for our own internal care homes, nursing staff will carry out the tests on the site. and will go in and out of the care home in order to be able to do that, and that reduces the number of people really falling within the care home. So it might be one nurse that does that per one home. They wouldn't do other homes, so we do have some support for local care homes. For the nursing homes already have nursing staff contained within their staff complement. The nursing staff will carry out the majority of the tests unless they would like some assistance with that. And we've had some medically led discussions recently by the clinical director, and we also have a further session with care homes next week, and an open clinic for care homes to consult with our GPs locally. So that's the kind of support that we've offered, rather than a mobile testing unit coming up to the care home and going in and testing absolutely everybody. And the other thing that we need to understand is that although the numbers are high, it's spread across a number of care homes. So for example, in my own internal run care homes, it's one unit that's affected. The others are perfectly clear at this point. So it would only be that one unit that you would enter into to carry out the test. You wouldn't necessarily be carrying out mass testing all at the same time and in the same way. So some of that is still being worked through just because of the volume of tests required. But at the moment, mobile testing units is not something that is being considered.
Right, thank you. Thanks for that. And have you got adequate supplies of test equipment?
Thank you.
I think the rollout is coming pretty fast at the moment. I think there are some difficulties with obtaining the right amount of testing kits in the right areas. The demand is varying across each area at the moment, but tests have been done and they have been coming back. And we've just had the discussion with Public Health this afternoon about concentrating on the areas with the care homes, and particularly the wider testing, concentrating on those at the greatest risk at this point, and trying to do that in an organised manner rather than flooding the entire system, and then those areas that are most at risk are not seen first.
Okay.
All right, thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that, Shona. If members have no further questions, thank you for that. Thank you. Sandra, back to you. Thanks, Shona.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor McGurk. We'll move on to section 6, if that's okay now, which is the section of support for businesses, and Ruth Cooper's going to provide an update on those business support programmes being administered by the Council on behalf of the Scottish Government. So bring Ruth Cooper in, if that's okay.
Yes, thanks. Ruth, would you like to come in, please?
Thank you, Convener. So we reported at a previous meeting that the councils were given 2 business grant programmes to administer on behalf of Scottish Government. Firstly, a £10,000 programme for businesses with a small premises with rateable value up to £18,000 a year, and the second, a larger grant for businesses only in the retail, hospitality and leisure sector, where again there was a rateable value as part of the eligibility criteria. We have, in the last 4 weeks, made a number of awards and have managed to administer, well, probably today, close to £20 million worth of business grant out to the companies in Renfrewshire. The figures that are in 6.2 are the figures close of play on Tuesday. And you can see from the numbers that a significant number of businesses, probably now over 1,700, have been awarded within Renfrewshire, and we're seeing the impact of those already. So that's really good news. Last week there was an additional phase 2 of this programme, which actually just launched on Tuesday this week, but the announcement was last week. And that was for multiple properties. So we're now seeing a number of new applications. I think we've had 80 since Tuesday coming in for those with more than one property. And the agreement there is that the additional grants will come in at a 75% rate. So there's a number of those ongoing at the moment. There was also an announcement from the Scottish Government of an additional £100 million of business support. Part of it would be administered by the councils, and that's highlighted in 6.5, the self-employed hardship grants for people who were recently made self-employed over the last year and therefore don't qualify for any additional grant supports that are on offer for the self-employed. Again, in 6.6, the numbers that we processed at that point was 85 awards. At that point, I think we have another 20 so far. So we're close to around £200,000 worth of grant support going out the door. The other two funds that were announced at that time are both being run through the Scottish Enterprise Agencies. One's around enterprise resilience with a £45 million budget, and the second is specifically for creative tourism and hospitality hardship with a £20 million budget. And we don't really have any figures from that so far, but we are told that the enterprise agencies have been inundated with requests for help there. I'm happy to answer any questions at all.
Thanks very much for that, Ruth. Any questions, members? No? No indication of a question there, Ruth. Thank you very much for the report today. Sandra, can I go back to you? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McGurk. Section 7 of the report provides members with an update on the support to our workforce on PPE, which is now more stable in its supply than previous weeks, and on the new testing procedures, which you will see are proving successful in getting our employees back to work wherever possible. Section 8 provides an update on the events programme specifically, and I'd like to bring in Louisa to speak to members about that work. Thank you.
Okay, Louisa, would you like to come in, please?
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, councillors. Nice to see you this afternoon. As you can see, we've laid out in the report the unfortunate decision we've had to take to cancel the remainder of the events programme up until the end of October, which takes us up to and including the Halloween festival. You'll be aware that we made an early decision to cancel the Food and Drink Festival and the British Pipe Band Championships as soon as the ban on mass gatherings was brought in earlier in March by Scottish Government at the outset of the COVID outbreak. And we wanted to hold off at that stage before making a decision on the rest of the programme and to get a better understanding of how long the lockdown restrictions would be in place and whether that ban would continue. And as we'll all be aware, as of today, those measures remain in place. We've carefully considered public safety in this, but the key point and the key message is that that ban on mass gatherings still remains in place. And public safety is going to be a priority for us as we move forward. It looks like long-term physical distancing will remain in place as well. And we've come to the conclusion that we have to now make the decision to cancel the events up until the end of October, taking into account that events aren't just one-day happenings. They're the culmination of months of work, a huge amount of engagement and participation with our local communities, and that's always been at the heart of our programmes through our parades and live performances, etc. And it just isn't possible to carry out that work in any meaningful way in a safe environment. We've also considered the numbers of our wider workforce that are involved in staging live events and the impact that it would have on our suppliers too, and the health and safety of everybody involved. What we were also very aware of is events do draw from the emergency services as well, and we feel particularly at this time that we cannot draw that level of support for police, ambulance and first aid services. We've kept a careful eye on the national arena, and you'll have seen we're in contact with Events Scotland and various promoters and partners that we work with across Scotland. And the general consensus you'll see is the cancellation of a number of major high-profile events across Scotland, including the Royal National Lodge, which was due to take place in October at the same time as our spree event. So we will continue to monitor the situation. We didn't want to make a decision on our winter programme just yet, but we do have to be really conscious of the guidance that's in place. And for us, in terms of events, is the physical distancing and the public safety element that is critical, and we need to consider above everything else. We don't wish to put the council at financial risk either, and this is the most sensible decision for us to take at the present time. I think just to point out to members as well that for Small Shot Day and also for the programme we're planning for the Radical War, we will be able to go ahead with a digital programme to support those events, and we're working hard on that in the background just now, and I can update members on that through the daily briefings at a later date. But we felt that marking that those events in particular, particularly Small Shot Day and the importance of workers and the coming together of workers was particularly poignant at this time, and we will deliver a digital programme to support that. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Louisa. Members, obviously you've got Section 7 and part of Section 8 to ask questions here. Councillor Nicholson, you have asked to ask a question, and then it's Councillor Mackay and then Councillor Devine. Councillor Nicholson, you want to come in, please?
Yeah, I think you picked up my question from the last one first.
Was it the last one? Right, okay.
Alistair was in before me.
Right, okay. Alistair, do you want to come in then? Thank you.
Yes, question 7 about the support for employees. And hopefully we're moving from the firefighting phase towards the fire prevention phase. And I'm looking, maybe not today, but in the near future, some idea on how the council proposed to deal with hot desking and screen partitions in the open plan offices that most floors have. And obviously some people will come back to the Renfrewshire building. Maybe some will decide to continue working from home. But given the layout of the building as it is, I'm quite keen to see some proposals going forward. Maybe this is something that's discussed between the administration and the council offices already, but not being privy to that information, I have to ask the question.
That's absolutely fine, Councillor Mackay. Sandra, do you want to give Councillor Mackay an update on that?
Yes, Councillor McGurk, happy to do that, and just to reassure Councillor Mackay that these are matters that officers have been actively reviewing in recent days and weeks, and certainly the arrangements for any use of the offices at Renfrewshire House would need to take cognizance of the social distancing rules that were in place at that time. There is a strong steer coming from government at the moment that home working should continue for the foreseeable future, wherever that is possible. So we don't expect a return to Renfrewshire House in the immediate future, and even if there was a relaxation of the restrictions on lockdown. So we are carefully considering which employees, if any, would go back to Renfrewshire House at the appropriate time. And we've already done some space planning work in terms of the numbers of staff that the building could accommodate to allow the appropriate space between employees, and really practical measures, as Councillor Mackay is suggesting, around screening, around one-way systems, around queuing for toilets and such like, and everything that goes along with that. So the operation of Renfrewshire House would be entirely different to what it was just before lockdown. And that's something that I would propose to bring back to this board before any decision was taken as to the reoccupation. And as I say, it would have to be in accordance with any guidance from the government moving forward.
Thanks for that, Councillor Mackay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nicholson.
Hi, it's not really a question, it's the events programme. I think this was to be expected, and I think for the officers, they've done a good job in presenting at the right time, because I think, like a lot of families, a lot of people out there were sort of holding off to see how this would play out. And I know a lot of families out there now sort of, the summer has literally been written off as well as part of all this. So I think this is a sensible thing to do because of the length of time that the planning takes to put these programmes into place. I know it's disappointing for a lot of people, but I think at the end of the day it's the right decision for the council, and it's been done at the right time to try and, but I think mainly is to try and protect the events in that sense as well, as much as protect the staff, employees and the public. I think the situation has to be right with regards to mass gatherings in particular, and people travelling to mass gatherings has to be almost the lockdown. I suspect, my own view, the lockdown would have to be almost completely removed, I think, before we reach that kind of stage of allowing hundreds and thousands of people to all gather together in the one particular place. So I think it's the right thing to do. I think the officers have presented a really good report on it, as I say, and any sort of discussion we have with our event providers and that is with a view of maintaining the links and connections to them, so that when we can, we'll bring them all back as quickly as we can and as safely as we can. So I say I welcome the report, and I think the public will fully appreciate why we're having to do that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you for that. Councillor Devine.
Just a quick one to Louisa. Will a decision on the lights and the fireworks be taken by the 20th of June? Will the lights still be going up though, although we might not have a switch on?
Louisa?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Devine. We would be hoping to make a decision in advance of the 30th, which would give us enough time to stand down contractors that we would normally be working with, and to give them the sort of maximum opportunity to change their plans. I think what we certainly don't want to do is remove all celebration in relation to Christmas. It's not actually the events team who are involved in Christmas lights. That's environment and infrastructure, and I'm sure we would be looking to see what sort of solution can be provided so that we don't remove all aspects of celebration around Christmas time. That may be a time where actually a digital programme is something that we can look at as well that would be very effective. So I think for now it's a watching brief, and in touch with Events Scotland regularly, our suppliers regularly, and to keep an eye on how that guidance works out. But I think we have to be prepared for the fact that physical distancing is here for quite a while to come, and it will shape ultimately what we're able to do.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Louisa. Sandra, would you like to do the rest of the report, please?
And that really concludes the presentation on the report, Councillor McGurk. Thank you very much, unless there's any final questions that members have.
I have.
Councillor Devine and then Councillor Mackay.
It's two questions, and it's on the very last page. It's on, give me a second, implications of report. It's on item 3 and item 10 it's about employment, I think. Could you explain what the item 3 and item 10 may mean for the workforce of Renfrewshire Council?
Okay, thanks. Sandra?
When you say item 3,
sorry, it's on yes, community and council planning. Sorry, and risk.
On the community and council planning.
Yeah.
I think he's preempted at item 3A, which we haven't started yet, Eddie.
Are you referring to the update report, Councillor Devine, in the implications section? So,
Yes, I've got it on paper. It's the implications of report, and it starts off with financial at 1, then it's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Right. Yeah. So it's section 3 and section 10.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, section 3 is really just designed, I suppose, to highlight to members that the work we're doing is to maintain services as much as we possibly can, and as restrictions are lifted, obviously we would look to maximise that wherever possible within the guidelines set out by the government as the weeks and months pass. Section 10 is really just recognising that normal service delivery levels are at risk because of the restrictions that are put on us as a result of the pandemic, and that those risks are obviously actively monitored and managed by the management team on a daily basis. That's all with a view to keeping essential services running. So all of the things that we discuss with you as part of this report are the items that we keep under regular review in terms of the availability of the workforce, the protection of the workforce, and so on, the funding and everything that goes with that. So I don't know if you had something specific in mind.
No, I did ask last week, and I've asked before. It's obviously ties in with the financial situation. In the end, it was just my reading of it was that it could be staff levels will be reduced after this is all over, and I don't expect that to be any time soon. But yeah.
Yeah, well, there's no plans at this stage to do anything like that, Councillor Devine, and clearly that would involve a decision making by the elected members on the council.
Yeah, I know. I think the Scottish or the British government's going to have another budget. I presume the Scottish government will need to have another budget, and I presume in that case then we'll need to have another budget as well, which this is going to be fun, I suppose.
We'll certainly keep you well briefed, Councillor Devine.
Thank you. Councillor Mackay, did you want to come back in?
Yes, please. There's a couple of items that don't actually appear in the report.
What is that?
Pop-up active travel infrastructure, which was financial support for that. And I noticed a week ago that Glasgow City Council and one or two other councils had actually implemented some additional cycle and pedestrian walkways and one-way systems, and I was wondering what Renfrewshire has done. Again, maybe this is something that may be discussed between the administration and yourselves, the officers, but again, not being privy to that information, I have to ask the question. So if you could answer that one first, and then I'd like to mention it.
Sandra.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor McGurk. Yes, we're aware of that funding becoming available in the last week or so, Councillor Mackay, and I know that that's something that Gordon McNeill has been reviewing. Gordon might want to say a few words, Councillor McGurk, on the timescales for bringing decisions back to the board.
Thank you very much for that, Sandra. Gordon, can you come in, please?
Yeah, no, I'm here. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just tail end of last week, Councillor Mackay, the Scottish Government announced £10 million worth of funding for local authorities to bid into to help at this time when there's less traffic on the roads, and to help with physical distancing to separate pedestrians and cyclists, and obviously with you'll have seen reported that there are more people cycling at this time, and it's to trying to encourage to continue that and to expand the number of people that are cycling. So when they made the announcement last week, the authority registered interest in the fund with Sustrans, who are going to administer it. Sustrans have responded to us to say that we'll be providing further guidance to local authorities over this week and next week, which will allow us to look at the criteria, look what we could look at in relation to funding, and then look at taking forward proposals. And as Sandra said, once we have that detail, the chance to look at it, we'll be in a position to, when the time's right, to bring information forward to the Emergencies Board. In relation to Glasgow and Edinburgh, where they've been in the press, what they have done, they've implemented emergency or specific traffic regulation orders to allow them to take forward, such as Holyrood Park and between Botanic Gardens and Kelvin Grove Park. So they've just used their existing road powers to do that, and it's not particularly the funding. The funding announcement was after they undertook those measures. So, as I say, once we have further detail, we've had a look at it and how it could be applied for Renfrewshire, we'll bring it forward when appropriate to the board.
Right. Is there anything? Sorry. Is there anything we can do under existing regulation, as you say, Glasgow and Edinburgh have done, to improve the situation for cyclists and pedestrians without waiting for further guidance?
They are, and ultimately, although the guidance is there and the funding's there to help to mark off areas and provide signage, etc., it will be the existing road powers in which anything will be framed under. So that there isn't new legislation, if you like, available to local authorities. It's existing legislation. It's just funding that will support. But we very much want to look at the criteria and see how it can best benefit Renfrewshire before we make any decisions.
Okay, thank you for that. In fact, whilst you're on, Mr. McNeill, I noticed that the UK government published guidance on the 5th of May with regard to the phased opening of recycling centres. Now, I know I keep asking this, but I'm only reflecting on what the constituents are asking. And would it be possible to have some plan as to how you're going to phase open the recycling centres when opportunity allows? Or maybe this, again, is something you've already discussed with the administration. I don't know.
Okay, Gordon would like to come in.
Certainly. Firstly, the guidance that was issued on the 5th of May was issued by DEFRA, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and that's only applicable in England. So matters in relation to the environment are devolved to Scotland. And that guidance that they've set out essentially is to give a guide, firstly, just to local authorities to ensure if they did open up HWRC sites, that there was appropriate social distancing in place, and also some communication messages that authorities may want to consider when they're advising the public. In relation to Scotland, the position is still very much being discussed at a national level. Scotland is looking to take a coordinated approach on how and when the HWRC sites are reopened. Certainly in Renfrewshire we have done some planning around what it might look like, but obviously we are doing that in conjunction on a national basis, and obviously we would take account of anything that's agreed on a national basis and how we would apply that locally in Renfrewshire. So when there are, as a national position, we are closer to understanding what it looks like, then certainly we would be looking to update members and how we're going to take that forward in Renfrewshire.
Thank you, Gordon. Councillor Mackay.
Thank you very much. That's fine. As long as we're kept abreast of the plans rather than just being presented with the ultimatum afterward.
Okay. Thanks very much, Councillor Mackay. I'll make sure that you are kept up to date on that. Thank you, Gordon. Sandra, can I take it back to you, please?
I think unless there are any final questions, that concludes item 2 on the agenda, Councillor McGurk.
Members, can we agree item 2 and the report by the Chief Executive, page 7 to 28? Councillor Mackay?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Councillor Devine?
Yes, happy with that.
Councillor Nicholson, you're
Yes,
ready.
yes.
Councillor Campbell?
Agreed.
Thank you. And myself, Sandra, that's everyone agreed to that report. Item 3 for the decisions for the board is 3A, education placing request procedure during the COVID-19 emergency, page 2934. Sandra?
Thanks, Councillor McGurk, and that will be Ken Graham who's coming in on that report. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Ken, would you like to come in on that report, please?
Thank you, Councillor McGurk, and hello to all the councillors on the board. It's good to see you all. The report you have in front of you is essentially a report regarding the annual process of education placing requests, but more particularly the appeals element of that process. the process happens this time every year, and in previous years it's followed a timescale that's set out in regulations. So the timescale would normally involve letters going out to parents who've made placement requests by the 30th of April. If they were unhappy with the decision made by the council, they have the opportunity then to appeal, and the council would then have a hearing within 28 days. The hearing would take place in front of the council's placing requests appeals panel that comprises councillors and also lay members. There was a concern because of the COVID crisis that those timescales would be difficult to comply with, and there's also concerns obviously about having physical meetings of the appeals panel to deal with any appeals that came up. So the Scottish Government brought out regulations which changed the deadlines that were mentioned in the original regulations. So for example, the deadline which councils had to respond was changed from the 30th April to the 31st of May, but you'll have seen from the last report that the decision letters have in fact now been issued by this council, so they went out earlier this week. So we've now got the opportunity to arrange for any appeal hearings that might arise out of those decisions. So we'd anticipate if there are going to be any appeals, they'll start arriving during the course of next week. In terms of the new regulations, we've got up to 3 months to organise any appeals, but we're hoping to deal with any appeals that we do get well in advance of that 3-month deadline. We're hoping, in fact, to try and deal with them all, if possible, before the summer recess, so during June. So that's why the report you've got is in front of you, in that, conscious that previously the board agreed that all meetings of boards would be suspended until the 24th of June. If we're to try and hold these appeal hearings before then clearly we need a change of view just in the examples of these particular place and request appeal hearings. So that's the first request before the board. The second request concerns the actual process of dealing with that. As I mentioned earlier, it's not possible to have these hearings physically, so the idea is that they actually take place remotely in front of the appeals panel as currently constituted. So the appeals panel has as the convener, who's Councillor Adam McGregor, has one opposition member who's chosen from amongst all the opposition members on the council, and one lay member, so there's 3 members on the appeals panel. How often it meets will depend, as you'd appreciate, entirely on the number of appeals we get, and then once the appeals are received, sometimes they don't go ahead, but you'll see from the report that over the last couple of years the numbers have varied, but it's been 9 and 18, and I understand the year before that it was 2, so I think we can anticipate that there will be appeals to deal with. So the recommendations in the report, the first 2 are just for noting. So the third recommendation is to agree to reconvene the place requests and exclusions appeals panel for the purposes of determining appeals during 2020 on dates to be set by the convener in consultation with the head of corporate governance. And the fourth recommendation is to agree that the head of corporate governance make provision for appeals to be considered by the placing requests and exclusions appeals panel to be dealt with remotely, as outlined in paragraph 3.7 of the report. So that will be probably by Skype or possibly by Teams, but a similar sort of arrangement that you're now used to using yourselves. Or there's a potential to do them by written submissions, but that's only if the appellant agrees to that. So we can't demand that everything's dealt with by written submissions. So we anticipate that there will actually be hearings that take place remotely at some point during June. I'm happy to answer any questions on that.
Thank you for that. Are there any questions, members? Do we agree with the report?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. That's it, Ken. Thank you very much for that. Philippe, can I ask you to stop recording now? We're going into the private session. Item 4.